to purchase securities, to bail out banks, and so on. Some funny people were talking about socialism in the United States at the time. Did that work or not? My impression is that it did a lot of good work, but you yourself, I remember, in a book of yours, point out that what needed to be done at that point was to save the financial system, which was close to meltdown, even though the damage was mostly on the real side of the economy.
Well,
Not
exactly. I mean, this is all really about financial things. But the way I would say it is that the bursting of the bubble had two kinds of effects. For the U.S., I think we can actually do this. At the U.S., the collapse of the housing bubble eliminated around $8 trillion of paper wealth. Of that, around $1 trillion was really exposure of the financial sector through various routes, but or maybe a bit more than that. But let's say $1 trillion. And the immediate concern was that $1 trillion of losses in the financial sector can have vastly disproportionate effects because it can collapse that sector. Because that sector is so highly leveraged, because it's so strategic, that terrible things can happen. And so it was urgent to prevent that piece of the losses from wreaking severe damage on the financial sector, which was done. The trouble is that you still have the other $7 trillion of losses, which is mostly household. And that's that we never found a way to resolve, and it's that other part that is a continuing drag on the economy. So we did the right thing. I mean, I think the U.S. government could have gotten a better deal on the financial rescue, but it did the right thing. But the problem was that was solving the acute phase of the crisis. That we got through the, oh God, we're all going to die phase of the crisis pretty well. But then we acted as if, okay, now everything will be fine, and that was what was wrong.
Right, good. And that takes me to the third stage of the crisis when, let's call it November 2008. You know, the U.S. has two governments at that point, right? Two presidents. Yeah. One is elected but is not a president, and the other one is a president, but he cannot act on 2009 fiscal year expenditures or taxation, whatever. And the Chinese dropped this bomb, $586 billion deficit spending, right?
Well,
that's what they do.
Well, China, yes. China is very. Right. I mean, China does this enormous stimulus very fast. Right. Two advantages. One, no need to pass legislation. And two, no need to police to avoid large-scale corruption. So those are things, unfortunately, that we cannot exactly emulate in Western nations. So, although it's worth pointing out, actually, that South Korea did a large, fast spending stimulus while actually being a functioning democracy. But yeah, the Chinese did a massive response in a way that the United States could not. I will say, though, I think it's probably not true to think that if we had only responded really forcefully in November, December 2008, that everything would have been solved. Because it wasn't just the loss of confidence and the crisis. There is the debt overhang. And for that, you need not just avoidance of crisis, but you need growth for several years. You probably need some inflation. So I don't think it was, but yeah, we could have had a better response than we did then that period of essentially nobody in charge was bad. One thing I should say, if you want to tell a terrible story about the future, not this dreary story, but a really scary story, suppose that we do in fact manage to have another banking crisis. Suppose that the foreclosure problems are worse than we think, or suppose that there really is a major sovereign default that shakes the system. The United States, after Tuesday, is going to be very much the situation you were describing for November 2008. We're going to have really, it's not clear exactly who's going to be in charge, if anyone is, and it's not going to be clear that any kind of rescue package could be arranged. If there was a call for another TARP type rescue, I think there's no way it would pass the U.S. Congress. So we actually are if you want, I think it's a 5 or a 10% probability, but we could, if we work at it hard enough, we could manage to have a total meltdown even now. Just wanted to encourage everyone there.
Just in case the acronym TARP is not familiar to somebody, stands for Troubled Assets Relief Program.
Yeah, there was the $700 billion in asset purchases that were used to rescue the banks, which, by the way, appears will be very nearly break even. It was not a loss of money in the end, but it could have been. Yeah.
Now you see that perhaps the point I'm going to lead to is about spending, actual deficit spending, because at the beginning of the third wave of reaction, everybody was very happy about government deficits, right? And I remember everybody cheering. Including you, even though you even said it is not enough when Congress in February 2009 approved this $787 billion deficit.
Right.
So spending was good back then, and deficit spending was good, right? Whether done in the Chinese way, which was pure spending, or the U.S. way, which was tax reduction, transfer to states which otherwise would have contracted, right? So it was a good thing, was it, back then?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the best estimate, if we had not had the Obama plan, the unemployment rate in the United States would be close to 12% instead of 9.6. It definitely is better, but of course, my greatest fear in early 2009 was that it would be enough to limit the rise in unemployment but not to produce an actual fall in unemployment, and that this would lead to that politically that voters don't react to counterfactuals, they react to facts. And if you can't show an actual improvement, then people will say, oh, your policy failed, and you won't get a chance. There won't be a second chance. I wrote that in about 10 columns in early 2009, and I'm sorry to say I turned out to have been right. So this is our problem.
Yeah. Well, now all of a sudden, on October 22nd, 2009, Fitch declares the Greek government's debt untrustworthy. And I made the point on the 23rd of June in this very classroom or room that sounds fishy to me, because the old government had resigned 17 days earlier. There was absolutely no way one could hold the new government accountable for that thing. And yet, nothing had happened. Up to then, up to the summer of 2009, government deficits were good. So we were all Keynesians. And then all of a sudden, Professor Berthellet, who is the person over there, pointed out that since my wife is Greek, I have some sort of prejudice in favor of Greeks. But let me hear something about these rating agencies. We know the Congress has been looking into their behavior for months and years now.
Well, rating agencies, on their history on sovereign debt is really very bad. Their history on domestic debt, we now know, on mortgage-backed securities is bad. But on sovereign debt, first of all, they're almost always a lagging indicator. Greece would be an unusual case where they moved in advance of the market. Normally, it's only after everyone has decided that there's a problem that the rating agencies notice it. But also, they tend historically to hold governments to be much more pessimistic about sovereign debt than about private debt, to be eager to downgrade governments in the face of what are not necessarily serious problems. Now, my understanding is Greece is it is very hard to see how the Greek thing works. It's the sin was not to catch it long before, but in other cases, I don't know if it's widely known that Moody's and Standard & Poor's both downgraded Japan in 2002. One of them, I can never remember which, actually downgraded Japan to a level below Latvia. And they said, no, look at the deficit's terrible thing. We can't see how this is going to, it's really bad. And the interest rates on Japanese debt rose briefly and then fell again. And here we are, 8 years later, Japanese 10 years are trading at about 1%. So they were completely wrong. They had a much, much too pessimistic view. And it has not been helpful. A lot of people actually in the U.S. they look at the behavior of the rating agencies and say the U.S. will hit the wall in 2020 or 2019 because that's about when we would expect the rating agencies to downgrade U.S. debt. And I say, well, who knows? But in any case, remember 2002 in Japan. The rating agencies actually know nothing about this.
Now this is very relevant, of course, for our discussion because perhaps not everybody in this room, most do, but not everybody perhaps knows that what rating agencies say is used or taken into account by central banks in order to decide what type of assets they're going to borrow or take as a collateral or purchase from commercial banks, right?
Well, that's part of the...
That's part of the problem.
Part of the problem with doing unconventional open market operations is that you either, short-term government debt, you know what you're doing. Long-term government debt, you more or less know what you're doing. Other things, it's been very difficult. The Federal Reserve has moved away from, for a while it was buying a kind of alphabet soup of, it had all of these programs to buy commercial paper and so on. And it's pretty much phased them out, in part because they were relying on the rating agencies to tell them which things they could buy, and the Fed is not stupid. They knew that they had no idea whether the stuff that was being called AAA was actually good debt or not. And I think they're all kind of relieved to be out of that business. I'm not sure that the rating agencies will matter. The Fed is not going to stop buying U.S. government debt, even if Moody's and Standard & Poor's downgrade America. But it's this problem. We've created a system which is really full of moral hazard and distorted incentives, and what we really should have done in financial reform was to establish an independently financed but official rating agency, but it was never even on the table.
So may we say that you didn't find it surprising when Jean-Claude Trichet decided, I remember 21st of May, to disregard the rating of agencies?
I didn't follow that one, actually, but I'm not surprised. It's... look, the central banks are in there. I think the ECB is... needs to act as a guarantor of European stability, not like a risk-averse investor. My problem, I think, with the ECB is it's acting too much like a risk-averse investor, and it needs to... I have my complaints about my former department chairman, but if we could clone Ben Bernanke and send him to the ECB instead of Axel Weber, that would definitely be an improvement.
And so, with this decision on the 21st, I may be wrong by 24 hours, I don't remember, 21st of May, Jean-Claude Trichet solved the Greek debt problem, didn't he?
Well, no. Right, Greece is now not reliant on the market for financing for the next few years, which is fine if you think that the situation will have resolved itself in the next few years. But I don't see how that's possible. You both require, Greece is being required to make an incredible move to primary surplus, which is a huge burden fiscally, and it's going to be facing declining nominal GDP, both because of the effects of the fiscal contraction and because of the, in effect you have an overvalued drachma, even though you don't have a drachma, and that's deflationary impact. So if you believe the IMF program, I mean, 4 years out, debt to GDP for Greece rises from 115 to 140. And I think the IMF is too optimistic. So I don't really see how this works. Maybe it's